"Tonight I need to go somewhere," Barron mumbled, a vague yet powerful thought occupying his mind. He didn't know what awaited him, but deep down, Barron felt strongly that the luxurious life he had wasn't everything. Unanswered questions kept surfacing in his mind. Who am I really? What is waiting for me out there? Instead of waiting for the answers, Barron decided to seek them out. He changed into a simple outfit, pulled a baseball cap low over his face, and quietly left the house without telling anyone. Tonight, Barron wasn't the youngest Trump, wasn't the focus of the political spotlight. He was just a young man with a heart yearning to explore the meaning of life. But he had no idea that his steps would lead him to an encounter that would completely change how he viewed the world and himself. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're tuning in from, city or country, in the comments below. And don't forget to hit subscribe, because tomorrow we'll bring you another inspiring new story made just for you. Under the autumn sky of Washington, D.C., the sunset painted a radiant orange over the towering buildings. Barron Trump, the youngest son of the President of the United States, felt his heart heavier than usual. The glitz of fame, the relentless chatter of the media, and the curious eyes of the public made him feel trapped in a golden cage. But today he decided to step out of that cage, seeking something truly meaningful. Barron didn't just want to escape the label of being the youngest Trump. He longed to experience life in a genuine way. Being born into the most powerful and wealthy family in the world afforded him many privileges, but he also understood it came with immense pressure. At just 19, Barron was well aware that fame and wealth couldn't replace the value of authentic relationships and touching stories from a simpler life one he had scarcely glimpsed. He remembered watching his father, Donald Trump, stand confidently before crowds, exuding authority and power. Yet in private moments, Barron also noticed the contemplative gaze in his father's eyes as he faced enormous responsibilities. That only deepened Barron's yearning for a life of true meaning, one that wasn't merely measured by success or power. That afternoon, Barron wandered through bustling streets. He had no specific destination, letting his feet guide him. As he passed a small intersection, he heard soft music flowing from a café named Haven's Rest. The light blue wooden door stood slightly ajar, revealing warm golden light and the rich aroma of roasted coffee. An inexplicable pull drew Barron inside. The café wasn't large, but it exuded an indescribable coziness. Hand-painted pictures on the walls told old stories, and small green potted plants were thoughtfully placed on every table corner. A few patrons whispered to each other, their soft laughter blending with the gentle clinking of spoons against porcelain cups. Barron chose a small table near the window, ordered an espresso, and opened a book by Victor Hugo. He appreciated how unassuming the café was, neither crowded nor ostentatious. It seemed like the perfect place for him to momentarily forget his unique status and live as an ordinary person, even if just for a while. But the tranquility didn't last long. Just as Barron began flipping through the first pages of the book, an unsettling feeling crept over him. He sensed someone's gaze fixed on him. Looking up, he met the piercing eyes of a middle-aged man seated at a nearby table. The man had a weary appearance, with a gaunt face, disheveled hair, and a worn-out coat. "Well, look who we have here." The man spoke in a raspy voice, his eyes flashing with mockery. "The Trump kid. Trying to play ordinary, are we?" The man's words weren't loud, but they were enough to draw the attention of others in the café. A few patrons glanced at Barron, their eyes filled with curiosity and surprise. Barron remained calm, though his heart raced. He set the book down and looked directly at the man. "You know me?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. The man smirked. "Of course. Who doesn't know you're Trump's son? But don't think sitting here with a cup of coffee will help you understand the lives of people like us." The atmosphere in the café grew tense. Barron felt all eyes on him, as though he were on stage, with an audience eagerly waiting for him to make a mistake. "I'm not pretending to understand, but I can listen," Barron replied, his voice low but sincere. The man raised an eyebrow, as if he couldn't believe his ears. He took a sip of coffee and slammed the cup down on the table. "Listen? What do you want to hear? How could someone like you, born with a silver spoon in your mouth, ever understand my struggles?" Barron looked at the man, his gaze free of judgment, filled only with genuine curiosity. "Maybe I can't understand, but I want to listen to know what you've been through." The man crossed his arms and let out a cold laugh. "You want to know? Fine. I used to be someone like you with dreams and hopes, but life isn't fair, it crushes everything." He paused, leaning closer to Barron, his tone growing sharper. "Do you know what it's like to wake up every day, not knowing how to feed your family? To look into your child's eyes and have nothing to put on the table? You'll never know." The man's words cut through the quiet of the café like sharp knives. Barron remained calm, his gaze unwavering. "You're right, I don't know. But I want to understand, which is why I'm sitting here. Tell me your story, and I'll listen," Barron said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. The man raised his eyebrow, seemingly skeptical of what he was hearing. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes filled with doubt. "You want me to trust you? You think just listening is enough? You have no idea how cruel the world out there can be." Barron took a deep breath and replied calmly, "I can't change the world, but I can start with the smallest step, listening to your story. If you can believe that someone cares, it's a start." The man was silent for a moment. Then he let out a dry chuckle, but this time it carried less mockery and more profound sadness. "Fine. You want to hear it? I'll tell you, but don't regret asking." The café seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the man's story, a tale both mysterious and heart-wrenching. Barron leaned forward, his eyes focused and ready to absorb whatever the man was about to reveal. The man looked at Barron, his gaze a mix of anguish and anger, as though he was ready to unload the burden he had carried for so long. His voice, each word drawn from a heart that had endured countless wounds, began to flow. "I once had a happy family. A small but warm home with my wife and 2 children. We weren't wealthy, but we loved each other, and that made me feel like a man of worth. My job at the steel factory allowed me to provide for them, and I was proud of that." He paused, his eyes searching for traces of the past. The memories of happiness seemed only to amplify the pain of the present. But then everything collapsed. The factory shut down. They promised to help us find new jobs, but nothing ever came of it. I lost my income, my pride, and eventually my family. My wife, couldn't handle the pressure. She left, taking our 2 children with her. She said she didn't want the kids to see their father fail. I couldn't blame her. I couldn't hold on to them, no matter how hard I tried. He swallowed hard, his eyes red but still holding on to a semblance of composure. His sigh seemed to merge with the quiet air of the café. Barron remained silent, not interrupting the man's outpouring of emotions. "You know," the man continued, his voice breaking, "people look at me and think I'm useless. But they don't understand. I did everything I could. I worked day and night, even took on jobs people looked down on, just to keep my family together. But everything still slipped through my fingers, like sand through my hands. I lost." The man bowed his head, his thin hands clasped tightly together, as if trying to hold back the storm of emotions. The café was so silent that the clinking of a spoon against a coffee cup at a nearby table seemed deafening. The other patrons no longer looked at Barron with curiosity, but with compassion for the story the man had just shared. The man leaned back in his chair as though all his strength had drained away. His gaze wandered, no longer focused on Barron, but lost in the emptiness of his memories. "You know," he said, his voice trembling, "when my wife left, I thought I'd reached the limit of my pain, but life always finds a way to show you that the bottom is deeper than you think." He swallowed dryly, his voice becoming shakier. "After my family fell apart, I lost the house. The small home that had been our haven, the place I thought I'd grow old in, was repossessed by the bank because I couldn't keep up with the payments. I roamed the streets, looking for work, but no one wanted to hire a middle-aged man, thin and beaten by life. Every day was a battle just to survive, to find a bit of food or a corner to sleep in for the night. And I kept asking myself why. Why is life so unfair?" He let out a bitter laugh, but it was more of a grimace. You can't imagine what it's like to sell every keepsake for a few dollars. Family photos, my wife's necklace, even my children's toys. Each thing I gave up felt like another piece of my soul being ripped away. Barron remained silent, his eyes filled with understanding. He realized that the man's words were not just a heartbreaking story but a challenge to everything Barron had ever thought about the ease of life. The man continued. Once, I saw my daughter from a distance. She was walking with her mother and another man. She's grown now, more beautiful than ever, but I couldn't bring myself to call out to her, couldn't get close. I didn't want her to see me like this. I even ran away when she turned her head, afraid her eyes would be filled with contempt. He slumped forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table, as if trying to anchor himself to some remaining strength. "Do you know what the scariest thing is?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's when you start to think the world would be better off without you." But every time that thought crossed my mind, I'd remember my daughter's eyes in my memory. Even though I'm no longer the strong father she once admired, I can't let her think her father gave up. So I keep going, just to survive. The café seemed to hold its breath, as though no one dared to exhale. Barron leaned closer, his eyes filled with absolute sincerity. His voice was warm and steady as he said, "You don't need to blame yourself. Sometimes, the smallest things we've done are enough to prove that we're not failures, and I believe you still have a chance to start over. Not to become the perfect father your daughter once saw, but to show yourself that you deserve to be happy." The man looked up, his red-rimmed eyes glistening with a faint glimmer of hope. Barron's words were not just encouragement but a light rekindling the path the man thought had long been buried. Barron gently shifted his chair forward, his eyes never leaving the man. His voice, calm yet filled with sincerity, resonated with the weight of compassion. "I can't say I understand what you've been through. I've never known what it feels like to lose everything, and I won't pretend that I do. But I believe that sometimes what we need most is someone willing to listen and stand by us during our hardest moments." The man looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. The sincerity in Barron's words seemed to stir something deep within him. Barron continued, each word carrying warmth and encouragement. "You've endured things no one should ever have to face, yet here you are, telling your story. That alone shows you're stronger than most people out there. What you've shared isn't just pain, it's a valuable lesson. I believe life isn't only darkness, and there will be light at the end of the road if you keep trying." The man hesitated, his emotions caught in the tidal wave of Barron's genuine words. His frail hands loosened, no longer clenching tightly as if fighting against the world. He nodded slightly, his voice trembling. "Do you really think so? That I still have a chance to change everything?" Without hesitation, Barron answered, his eyes bright with conviction. "Of course. No one is a complete failure. What you've lost doesn't define who you are. It's how you rise from those losses that truly shapes your worth. You've survived things most people couldn't even imagine, and that proves you have the strength to rebuild your life." The atmosphere in the café seemed to freeze in time. Those around them quietly observed the conversation, their gazes filled with awe and admiration. A woman seated nearby whispered softly, "He's remarkable, not just for what he's saying but for how deeply he listens and understands." Behind the counter, a young barista smiled and murmured to a coworker, "Who would have thought someone like him could be so grounded and compassionate? This is a lesson we should all remember." The man looked at Barron, his eyes beginning to well with tears. His voice broke with emotion as he said, "Thank you. Thank you for not just listening, but for giving me a reason to believe in my St. Ave again. I'd forgotten that sometimes just having one person care can change an entire inner world." Barron offered a small, reassuring smile. His presence and his words seemed to radiate an unspoken promise of hope, a gentle reminder that even in the darkest moments, a light could still shine through. Barron placed his hand on the table and gently replied, "You need to not only believe in yourself but also trust that there are people in this world willing to help. Start again, one small step at a time, and you'll find your path." The atmosphere in the café was filled with emotion. A few people clapped softly, their applause quiet but sincere. They admired Barron not for his fame, but for his heart, a heart willing to empathize and share. The man stood up, his gaze no longer heavy with despair. Bowing slightly to Barron, his voice brimmed with gratitude. "Thank you, young man. Thank you for reminding me that I still have a chance, that I still have worth. I won't forget this." Barron smiled, saying nothing more. He had said what needed to be said, and done what needed to be done. He knew that today wasn't just another ordinary day, it was a day when both he and the man found a meaningful connection between two seemingly distant lives. Time passed quietly as the man's story lingered in the café's warm ambience. Despite the chill outside, the space inside seemed cozier than ever. The patrons continued their lively conversations, but there was a newfound warmth in the air. As Barron stepped out of the café, he tilted his head upward to the sky, which had begun to darken. The last rays of sunlight lingered softly on the cobblestone street. He walked slowly, letting the autumn breeze brush against his face. In that moment, Barron realized his eyes had become moist without him noticing. He wasn't crying because of the man's story, though it was heartbreaking and haunting. He cried because he had found a fragment of the meaning he had long sought. Meaning didn't lie in fame or wealth, but in the ability to make a difference, even through a simple word or a small act. Barron's eyes shone with a newfound determination. He knew his journey to seek meaning had only just begun. There would be many more people like that man, needing someone to listen, needing a word of encouragement. And for the first time in his life, Barron felt he knew what to do next. Under the streetlights that had just flickered on, his shadow stretched long across the street. A young man, carrying within him the belief in empathy, stepped into the twilight of the evening but no longer felt lost. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and share it. Subscribe to help us reach our first milestone of 1,000 subscribers. It's a tremendous source of inspiration and encouragement for us to bring you more compelling stories. We value every piece of feedback you leave in the comments. Thank you for joining us, and see you in the next story.